GoldenEye 007, and we're talking about the game, not the movie. In fact, I'd say this is one of, if not the only situations where a game based off of a movie is actually more popular and well remembered than the movie itself. I do remember watching the movie and enjoying it, though I gotta say that a huge part of the enjoyment was just seeing the scenes played out that I had already played through in the game. GoldenEye might also be the game responsible for really kickstarting the first-person shooter craze. On consoles, that is. The genre had already been well established on the PC side of things, and boy will PC gamers let you know about it, back then and still today. Alright, so now for the question at hand. I think whether or not you'd still enjoy playing this game is going to vary from person to person. Having played the game at the peak of its popularity will certainly help, as well as what you're expecting going into it. The game has undoubtedly aged in certain ways, which I'm going to go over, and you're not going to enjoy yourself unless you can adjust to those things. Okay, we'll get to the game's single player mode, but I think it goes without saying that this game really made its mark with the multiplayer. Utilizing the Nintendo 64's 4 built-in controller ports, you had an extremely easy and convenient way to play with a bunch of friends. And yeah, it was split screen, which would encourage people to peek at your section of the screen in order to find you, but come on folks, there's some very practical solutions to this issue. Okay, but now it's time to talk about the elephant in the room, which is the common criticisms you hear against this game nowadays. There's generally 3 things that stick out to people, and that would be the visuals, the controls, and to some extent the fact that it couldn't be played online. Alright, so let's start by addressing the visuals. Pretty common for the era, you had some 3D graphics that look pretty primitive by today's standards. And because it's not representing things that are more cartoony in nature, like a lot of the Nintendo IPs were, it makes the poor visuals stand out more. Trying to depict things that resemble real life is just a much more difficult task. However, I will say that it added a bit of a comedic nature. For example, the faces of some of these enemies look pretty awful. Yeah, that's fun to blast away, and that's something that can still be laughed at today. Especially if you have the DK mode on, which is basically a big heads cheat. This also applies to multiplayer modes, where you'd often have somebody all of a sudden be right up in your face as you'd frantically blast away at it. Let me tell you, some good times, and I remember playing some matches where everybody was laughing really hard. I can't help but think that the creators knew the faces looked ridiculous, even back in 1997. It's made by Rareware, who had a sense of humor for sure, and so I'm gonna go ahead and just assume they did. I mean, they certainly put in all the cheat codes that made the game goofy, so it just makes sense. Okay, next I want to talk about the controls, and this is probably the biggest adjustment that people used to playing more modern first-person shooters have to deal with. The biggest difference is that there is only a single analog stick. As a result, by default you use the analog stick to move forward and backward, as well as turn left and right. However, if you want to strafe left and right, then you gotta use the C buttons. And looking up and down requires pressing the up and down C buttons as well. Pretty funky, huh? Now, back in the day, this is just what everybody was used to, but with the more traditional dual analog stick setups we see today, this can be hard to go back to. Now, I should point out that you can adjust the controls, and there's even an option to use 2 controllers at once. That's right, 1 player with 2 controllers, but it still feels pretty strange to do. That being said, people like to joke that you need 3 hands to use a single N64 controller, so imagine how impressive you'll look using a single hand for each controller. Now that is a real gamer. Sure, it doesn't work great, but I still have to give Rareware a lot of credit for putting the option in there. Lastly, I feel like I need to mention the fact that the game didn't have a prominent online mode, even though that's understandable for a game from 1997, and even if the servers would be down by now anyway. I bring it up because if we're talking about how this game has aged, an online mode is pretty much synonymous with all the first-person shooters that came after it. However, because the game didn't use two analog sticks, aiming wasn't really as emphasized as it was in later shooters. The game even has a bit of an auto-aiming assist that was pretty common to have turned on. Because of this, it was more about positioning and outsmarting your opponent instead of aiming, although it is possible to hold down the right bumper and try to get those coveted headshots, but you still have to come to a complete stop. Now it's time to talk about the single player, for those of us who either don't enjoy multiplayer for some reason, or simply because GoldenEye had a great single player mode. The big difference with this campaign mode compared to first-person shooters that came before it would have to be the emphasis on completing different objectives in each level in order to complete it. Naturally, being a game where you're James Bond, this lends itself perfectly to having missions with different objectives you need to carry out. It's all handled so well too, with an extensive briefing report you're given before you start each mission. There's a ton of levels, and adding even more replay value is the fact that the harder difficulty levels also increase the number of objectives you need to complete. Plus, the levels themselves are really well designed, with each level feeling pretty distinct and giving you lots of fun things to do. There's just so many great moments, like early on in the game shooting this enemy in a bathroom stall from an overhead vent, or realizing that you can hop into a tank for the first time. The music is excellent, of course, and very well themed given how much inspiration it has to go off of with the James Bond property. This game was mega popular in its heyday too. I remember pretty much everybody with an N64 having this game. It was such a big deal that there have been multiple attempts to cash in on its success with later releases, but none of them quite live up to the original's reputation, and there probably never will be a game that does. Okay, so there you have it. Hopefully my breakdown of the game will either allow you to decide if you still want to play it, or perhaps just relive some of your nostalgia and love for the game. Either way, those are my thoughts, but I'd love to hear what you think. Did you love it back in the day, and would you consider still playing the game nowadays? As always, be sure to let us know down in the comments, and I will see ya in the next video.